Morning once again. We definitely start off with the press review. Take a look at the Standard newspaper and stories that are making headlines before we get to discuss the biggest issues that we have. A number of things that happened yesterday. The biggest was the funeral service there of the late General Joseph Nkaissery, who was laid to rest yesterday at his home in Kajiado. A number of leaders who showed up there. President Uhuru Kenyatta, NASA presidential flag bearer Raila Odinga among those who were present. Gentlemen, it was a very sad day yesterday for the people of Kajiado, but what would you remember most with General Joseph Nkaissery for yourself?
Well, Ada, I had the privilege of meeting him before he became the CS, and one thing you remember is that after he became a CS with a lot of state power, he never changed his demeanor or as a persona. He did not start now running around with so many bodyguards, and he was very strict that on a typical day, even when he had a lot of time, he wouldn't have more than 3 beers, something that I think Kenyans need to emulate because now we drink a lot of alcoholic beverage. But I think most important, he was loyal to the state. He was not loyal to President Kenyatta. He was not loyal to Raila Odinga. He remained loyal to the state, which is a very good thing. Because the tragedy we have today is that most of our public servants have taken political decisions and have taken political positions. So you find a public servant is either Jubilee leaning or NASA leaning, and at the end of the day, they don't deliver value for the society. And I think maybe when you're given a position to serve in the public service, you need to be loyal to the state, so that if the president tells you to do something which you consider wrong or against your oath of office, you can actually look at the president in his eye and tell him, Mr. President, you cannot do this.
Right.
And President Kenyatta yesterday admitted as much. He said that Nkaissery would actually look at him in the eye and give a divergent view and explain why he's running with that. And that's in short supply in the public service.
That's definitely not only seen in the government. We've had stories on how he went against the tide even when he was at ODM as a party. Mutinda, for you?
Yeah, what I remember most is during the 2007-2008 post-election violence, because he had been elected as an ODM MP, and that was the time that most of the opposition MPs then were actually calling for mass action. And you know, Kajiado happens to be one of the most cosmopolitan counties we have, and that means that there are very many people who are not originally from Kajiado who've settled there. And I remember him advising his people not to try and cause violence to anybody they sold their land to. At least that really stood out, because at that point most of his peers were calling for action so that there is forced negotiation. But he reminded people that that blood will remain in your hands if you actually cause violence to someone who gave you money to buy that piece of land. I think that really stood out, and honestly, that is the time I noticed Nkaissery as a politician who is principled. Yes.
Yeah, I think I like the fact that when the nation needed him most, you know, he stood up to the occasion and accepted to be a cabinet secretary in charge of interior. You know, I think we'd been faced with a number of, you know, insecurity issues, and there was this clamor for somebody who had the command, somebody who had the history of being in the military. And when the government came calling on the general, he actually took the challenge, and I can say that he did a terrific job. In the past, I think it's important to underscore the fact that he was serving the people of Kenya, and what I echo what Dismas has said, that he actually took his call to a service to the state and not individuals who are in position of authority, which is something that should not go unnoticed. The fact that he was so principled enough to understand that whatever he was doing, it was for the greater good of the greater majority of Kenyans.
All right. So on page 8, of course, the funeral service of the late General Joseph Nkaissery. His send-off is on the top page of the Standard newspaper. But quickly, gentlemen, I would like us to go to page 8. Something very interesting. IEBC asks for extra security in clash-prone areas. We've seen a number of areas have already been termed as hotspots ahead of the general election. But some leaders, one of them being Kilifi Governor Amason Kingi, as well as Women Representative Aisha Jumwa, saying that some of these these areas being equipped as hotspot areas is just a decoy, because they want to hinder voters from turning out in large numbers in these areas that have been seen or are largely perceived to be opposition areas. What do you think, Mutinda, about the issue of terming some areas as hotspots, while leaders say, no, this is just a ploy by the government to hinder voters from turning out in large numbers in this area?
I think when it comes to intelligence, the security apparatus have got the most reliable intelligence regarding these things. And, you know, politicians are partisan, and some of them are actually involved in making some of these areas insecure. And that is why we actually called for an independent police force, so that when they give us reports about some of these things, we don't look at it from a political lens. And I would want to look at some of these incidences that way, that these are people who are specialized to deal with security matters, and they have intelligence to tell them that some areas are likely to have problems than others. And it's important for them to act, to preempt that, so that we again don't blame them for having slept on the job. So the problem would be if we start noticing things that don't add up. But if it is just clear that we face potential danger here and we need to be prepared, I think that is what security apparatus should be doing, so that they are not caught off guard. But
where do we draw the line for politicians between national security and your own political interests?
There are several things which come at play. Number one, for most Kenyans, the interaction with the police is a horrible one. Actually, for most people, even here in Nairobi, the low-income areas and in the countryside, wherever they see a policeman, they run away. They run very fast, because it's assumed that you are always guilty when you come across a policeman. So in as much as the NIC and the Kenya police have identified hotspots, they must not make that public. What they're supposed to do is then come up with preventative measures to ensure that the situation that is going to arise at the hotspots has been contained. Making that public will make some people very nervous, and they'll not want to show up on the voting day to go and cast their ballots. And NASA has already indicated that's a voter suppression strategy, that they're making, they're saying particular areas are going to be hotspots, so that on the material day, on election day, there's a very good reason to have so many security agencies, so that, you know, people fear to go and cast their ballots. The ideal situation would have been when the NIC, which I think should be disbanded, and the Kenya police, when they come up with intelligence, then they should come up with proactive measures to manage that situation, instead of making it public. You see now they're behaving like members of civil society, saying a particular area is going to be a hotspot, then they go back and sleep without coming up with proactive measures to manage the same. And for politicians, we'll always take advantage of that. Right now, if you speak to a Jubilee politician like Mr. Kavemba here, he will say that's the best thing to do. When you speak to NASA, they'll say it's a voter suppression. But at the end of the day, the police should move with speed, make sure that we don't have anything called a hotspot, so that anybody who is a registered voter is able to cast their ballots.
Husband, do you agree?
Yeah, I actually agree with Dismas, and probably I need to look at it from a communication perspective, because one thing we have to understand in this country is that there is a sense in which the relationship between the police force and the people they are supposed to protect is not that amiable. It's kind of frosty, and it can be intimidating to have a high presence of the security forces in a polling station. And therefore, in a sense, NASA has a case here that, you know, this can be voter suppression, or a situation where you just want to intimidate voters and let them not come and vote. But I think, having said that, does the government have something to do in places where there is a security threat? Yes. Do they have the machinery to gather intelligence? Yes, they do. But the manner in which they communicate probably should be enhanced in such a way that if you are saying that Kilifi is, you know, there is a security threat in Kilifi, there is no security threat in Kisumu, there should be a benchmark, so that to any other person you are communicating to, they actually know that these are the indicators that call for some beefing up of security in Kilifi and not in Kisumu. So much so that everything is above board, so that anyone, you know, would understand that there is no politics in this. This is just intelligence, and therefore the security agencies are being proactive in providing enough security in areas that are facing certain threats.
I want to say something. You know, when I was in school, I remember one of the functions of the police was to deter crime. And one of the ways they deter crime is just by their presence. And this is very practical. If someone is thinking of committing a felony and he sees policemen on patrol, of course, he or she will think twice. And that is the spirit with which the government is making public the areas where they have identified as potential hotspots, so that that by itself will act as a deterrent to crime, so that those who thought that whatever they were planning had not been known, then they'll know, it will take them by surprise that the government is already aware, and it's putting in place mechanism to ensure that it doesn't happen. So there is nothing wrong with making this public, so that even those within those areas who are thinking that they're probably having some underground plans that are not known, then this kind of notices make them aware that actually the government is already aware of what they might be planning. And in the spirit of deterring crime, then it is made public, and the necessary arrangements are made to ensure that there is sufficient security personnel on the ground. I don't think there is anything wrong with that.
Yeah, because I mean, the issue is not whether they are deterring crime. The issue is why in certain areas. What calls for deterring of crime in certain areas?
Intelligence.
Is it possible to tell us that intelligence has given us this information about this particular area, and about this other area there is this information that there is no threat at all, and therefore what you are going to do is to mitigate crime, so that we get to understand that these are the issues, and this is why the security is coming on board? Because we went to the same school with Gavem, and I can tell you that the presence of security was to deter crime. But every time we saw security in our campus bars, we would throw stones. I mean, for us, it was a confrontation. And I want to believe that there are so many people who still believe that where there is security, there is bound to be chaos. Every time people along Busia, all the way to Maseno Road, saw Maseno University students, they were thinking there is bound to be chaos here, especially if you see security men. And I remember at some point when we were in campus, anytime there was a mutiny, we would go to the police station together with a friend of mine called Lule and tell them, please don't come. We will sort this. And by not showing up, we would end up having a very peaceful demonstration. Then we go back to campus. Anytime they showed up, we'd have chaos.
So what are we saying? That there's a likelihood there would be chaos in these areas that have been mentioned as hotspots?
Well, you know, that probability does exist. But I want to go back to what Kavemba said. When I was also in primary school, we were told that there's a thin line between the state and a political party. Now, the reason why NASA is very nervous today is that top public servants have taken public positions that they're supporting Jubilee, so that even if a public servant is making a statement with well intentions, grounded on intelligence, NASA is likely to smell a rat. Because, you know, the public servants, you know, they contradict Chapter 6, they contradict the Leadership and Integrity Act, but they still go ahead and have identified that they're supporting Jubilee as a political outfit. Now, under those circumstances, even if they're well-intentioned, for instance, they're saying Cliff is going to be outsport, the local governor would say, no way, I cannot trust these public servants, because the intelligence, the police, all other security operations have said we are working with the Jubilee administration. And if they've got this information, intelligence information, they're supposed to engage in those surgical operations. That if Mr. Y is likely to engage in crime, is the person who is supposed to be under surveillance, or if he's already committed a crime, then he gets prosecuted to save the country from that mischief. But again, when you talk about an organization like Nkaissery, I don't know whether they've got the capacity to actually identify a place as a hotspot, or whether when they get the information, they're supposed to give it to the Kenyan police. Because again, when you look at the chairman of the Nkaissery, is clearly a Jubilee operative. So when you have Ole Kaparo as the chair of Nkaissery and is making those statements, you know, Kenya, again, there's a deficit of trust. So when Ole Kaparo makes a statement, people are likely to question it. They'll be asking so many questions, asking, is this real, or this is part of a voter suppression strategy? And as Esbon has indicated, if we should also now do public participation in declaring hotspots. To be told that for a place to be a hotspot, it must meet the bare minimum, then we declare it, to avoid that kind of mistrust. But right now, Ole Kaparo would have very good intentions, the Inspector General of Police would have very good intentions, but NASA will always smell a rat, because they have declared in public, we want to ensure that Jubilee wins.
Kavemba, would you respond to that?
You see, the problem we have in this country is politicizing everything. We actually don't even give our institutions room to do their job. Now, he wants all of us to be security experts, so that we are given information and we do public participation to decide. Who, for instance, doesn't know that Lamu is a hotspot? It's just, for instance, who doesn't know that there are issues in Mandera? People have been abducted, Al-Shabaab has been killing people. Some of these things are just forthright issues. But because we want to politicize everything, now we even want these institutions to stop doing their job so that it is us, the public. There is a reason why people go for training. There is a reason why people specialize. As I sit here, I'm not a security expert. And I believe that there are people who are paid well, who have got proper training. And this the mapping of the country into safe zones and potentially volatile regions is evidence. It is guided by evidence. Now the problem is that we want to politicize the institutions to an extent that we probably even are left to do their job as the public, but practically that is not possible. The truth of the matter is that there are areas where we have high tension because of political reasons, and the government has got a responsibility to ensure that they preempt any such activities. And do you know, if these things happen and the government is caught on the back foot, then you know what we are going to say? We are going to blame them. And yet when they seem to be ahead of whoever is planning these bad things, we also want to blame them. The thing is, let us start giving institutions space to do their job. You know, we have an independent police force. Probably what the police force needs to do, like the judiciary is doing, is to assert its independence more, so that it wins the confidence of Kenyans across board. Because ordinarily, the police is not politicized, and it shouldn't politicize. It should make everybody feel safe, irrespective of whatever political positions they take. So it is clear from my fellow panelists here that they are part of the people who doubt the independence of some of these institutions. And so probably the onus is on the institutions to, going forward, to assert themselves more as people who are guided by evidence and nothing else as they execute their mandate.
Husband, as a communication expert, and as he says, the lack of confidence in a number of institutions, you talk about going forward, they need to assert themselves, but with 23 days to go, there's lack of confidence for some of the most important institutions in this country. Where does this place this particular election, given how the public perceives these institutions?
Yeah, you know, the issue is that when there is perception of, you know, biasness, in the sense that people don't believe that whatever you're doing as an independent institution is objective enough not to lean towards any side of the political divide, there is likely to be politicization of the same thing. You know, when you talk about you know, classifying areas as security threats, the issue is you need to assert yourself as an independent body, so much so that the way you communicate, it comes out clearly that whatever you're doing is not arbitrary. It is systematic, it is informed by intelligence, and you communicate it in a very proactive way, and make sure that your communication basically restrains any evil and promotes a lot of good. And I think that is where they are missing the point, that the moment they do certain kinds of communication, it appears that they want to disenfranchise. It appears. They may not have that intention, but the moment you say Kilifi, and then people understand that Kilifi is predominantly a NASA zone, and you have no critical criteria that you anchor the reason why you have Kilifi and not Kisumu, for instance, and you saw what happened in Kisumu, and you want to ask yourself, if Kisumu is not a hotspot, why is it that this happened to the president and the deputy president? If Baringo is not a hotspot, why is it? So questions will always linger, you know. And I agree with Kavemba that we are not all security experts, but we can easily perceive what is going on. And the moment these institutions allow us to perceive some sort of mischief, then it becomes difficult for them. And they give politicians room to come in now and frame certain actions by these independent institutions in a way that put the best foot of the politicians forward, which is unfortunate.
Akisa, allow me to say something.
Yes, quickly, then you can take a break.
Yeah, one has to give credit now to the Chief Justice, because a few days ago, the President and his deputy and a number of senior politicians started invading the independence of the judiciary. And the Chief Justice came out in very strong terms, and he said, we are independent, and we are not going to allow anybody to undermine our decision on independence.
So is that what we expect from all these institutions?
That's what we must expect. And after he pronounces himself that way, then now it must be followed by action. That's the kind of thing you expect from the Inspector General of Police. By saying that we've identified these as hotspots, and give us reasons. In as much as Kavemba said that we are not security experts, but we have got the Nyumba Kumi initiative, And President Kenyatta himself has said, security begins with you. So you may not know how to use a weapon, but you can smell a rat. When you see somebody in your neighborhood who has gone to buy sticks from the local shop or has gone to the forest with a big panga to cut sticks, you can tell there's mischief. So security begins with me, and the president has indicated as much. So when non-professionals complain, then the Inspector General of Police is supposed to dilute this information and then give us very empirical facts so that we can now say the Inspector General is not taking sides. Because as we've indicated earlier on, there's a deficit of trust in Kenya. For instance, if say Raila Odinga says the sky is blue, Jubilee will say no, it can never be blue, it's going to be green. And the converse is the case. So that means that the so-called independent organizations must stand up and convince us that they're ready to secure the elections. Like for instance, when you have violence in the president was in Kisumu, and we are told that some people attempted to pelt stones. One would have expected the Inspector General of Police to ensure that those guys have been arrested so that it serves as a lesson to other Kenyans. But now such incident happens, the Inspector General has not said anything, nobody has been arraigned before a court of law, then the rest of the Kenyans are going to say, well, this is now our best practice. We can do whatever we want to do.
All right, let's take a short break. We will definitely be back with this conversation. I know Mutinda has a rebuttal, but let's take a short break here on Sunday edition. Don't go too far. We still have a lot more lined up for you.